Hey guys, it's me, the Lit teacher here, and today I'm going to deal with the unfamiliar text examination. Specifically, I'm looking at the Level 3 paper. I'm also touching on the scholarship exam because what I want to look at in this video is the comparative response. So this is question 3 in the Level 3 paper, and it's also section A in the scholarship exam. It's essentially the same thing. You have two texts and you have to write a comparative response. So how do you do this? What might that look like? What would be a good structural approach to this? Well, that's what I'm going to talk you through in this video. I'm calling it the ABC approach, and yeah, I'd love to hear your feedback on whether this is something that makes sense to you or works for you in an exam context. So let's get straight into things. I'm going to cover just the basics of the comparative, like what is it, how does it work, what are some of the key things that you need to understand before you go into it. Then I'm going to run you through this ABC strategy. Now, I have ripped this off the 2023 Excellence Exemplar from the NZQA website. It's an E8, and I'm going to be using the texts that they discuss as an example throughout this video. So it would be kind of good for you to go and read that paper. You don't need to pause the video and go and read it right now, but certainly after this, it would be an awesome thing to have a look at because it's just an excellence response. But it's also structurally really clever, and you'll see how I've taken inspiration from it to introduce you to this ABC strategy. Finally, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how you can perfect this strategy. And yeah, shock horror, it's going to require some practice on your part, but that's totally fine because you're like a dedicated student, right? That's why you're watching my videos, because you want to do really well. And I'm going to talk you through a few tips that will help you perfect the strategy at the very, very end. Okay, let's just get into things. How does this comparative thing work, or like what is it even? Well, essentially, as the title suggests, it's a comparative response, right? So basically you're taking text A, you're taking text B, and you're kind of discussing them in comparison to one another. This can involve direct comparison, similarities, but also kind of contrasts or differences. There is, of course, a frickin' question, people. Whether you're doing the level 3 paper, you will note that this is question 3. Yeah, question 3. It means there's a specific question that's directing the comparative response you have to write. It is not going to be the same or even necessarily similar to the text A and text B questions. It's going to be its own unique beast with its own specific keywords that you're going to need to get to know and you're going to need to read and use to focus your discussion. The same goes for scholarship, where this is section A. Same deal. You get two texts, you get a specific question or statement, and you've just got to write a comparative response comparing those two texts. Okay, so your job in this comparison is to touch on what are called significant aspects. Now, if you're really obsessed with NZQA jargon, you can go and read the achievement standard to find out what they are, but I'll just tell you what they are anyway. It's these things. It's audiences and purposes, right? It's things that your teachers will have been stressing to you for years. Writer's purpose, all that business. It's ideas, which can be pretty much anything, right? Ideas can refer to themes, feelings, insights, opinions, whatever. Then it's language features, my personal favorite, all the figurative devices, parts of speech, all of that jazz, language features. And finally, but not the least thing, kind of something that I feel like is overlooked, structure. Structure is another aspect. So how is the text actually constructed? How is it organized? If it's a narrative, what does that narrative look like? Structure. Something that is often overlooked, but some really, really good students kind of pick up on and make really insightful commentaries as a result. So basically, put really, really simply, this exam is where you are discussing similarities and differences. That's what it is, people. It's similarities and differences. How are text A and text B similar, but also different? It's comparative. Okay, so let's get into just talking about my strategy. Now, before I do this, I want to touch on the texts that I'm going to be using as an example and give you a little bit of context here. I think it would be really super helpful. You will probably struggle to go and read these texts because you know that everything is like copyright protected on the NZQA website, unless you're like a teacher like me and you've got this kind of secret access to get them. By the way, a good tip is if you want to get access to these papers is actually ask your teachers, because your teachers can access the copywritten material through their logins to NZQA, and they'll be able to run those papers off for you. So yeah, I probably just made a whole lot of work for a whole bunch of teachers because you'll now be pestering them for those papers, but that's fine. That's their job, right? That's what they're meant to be doing. Anyway, I digress. In 2023, there were two texts. The first one was text A. It was called One Way and Another, and it was a poem by this guy called Kevin Ireland. And yeah, it'll sound pretty weird, but it's about a guy who's taking a shower, and he's kind of reflecting nostalgically on like taking a shower as a kid, and how the technology of showering has kind of evolved in his lifetime to become this kind of modern marvel that it is now, and how great it is to take showers, which, yeah, we can all agree that's true. Text B is a prose piece. It's called What's in a Name. I believe it was from a North and South article by Anna Rafferty Connell. She's essentially reflecting on marriage and how when people get married, they take each other's names. And she's thinking about a teacher she had as a child who was kind of radical because she kept her maiden name. So it's a kind of interesting look at name change during marriage and the kind of gender dynamics that result in that. Okay, so now you've got a little bit of background on the text, just because I am going to be using them as an example. And yeah, these are the texts that are used in the 2023 exemplar if you go and read that too. All right, so let's get into my ABC strategy. Now, like my previous strategies for just dealing with independent texts, like text A and text B on their own, there are two phases here. There's the first phase, which is the reading phase, also involves some planning, and then there's the second phase, which is the writing phase. So let's just talk through the reading phase. Step one of this phase is actually completing the other parts of the paper first. So as you know, in the level 3 exam, the comparative is question 3. It's the last question in the paper. And I'm going to strongly advise that you do this in that order. You do this as the last response that you write in that exam. The reason being that you will have spent a lot of time doing question 1 looking at text A and question 2 looking at text B. So by the time you come to do a comparison of both of these texts, you'll be pretty familiar with them, and it'll probably be a bit of a shortcut to you making a discussion. So I'm going to suggest that that's a strategy that you employ. Okay, so assuming that you've done that, you're up to question 3. What is the first thing you're going to do? Yeah, it's read the frickin' question, people. Oh my gosh. It's going to be its own specific question, as I've outlined already. It's going to have its own specific keywords that it's asking you to use to focus your discussion. You're going to need to read that question really carefully and figure out what those keywords are. Okay, so let's assume you're across the question now. What are you going to do? If you have time, my suggestion would be to look back over the texts really quickly. So this might be a quick reread that you do here. You might also, if you have time permitting, quickly re-annotate them. This is where having a different colored highlighter or a different colored pen can be really, really useful, because it means you can just highlight different things and you'll know that those are specific to this individual question here. Okay, now once you've done this, bear with me, people. I know there's quite a few steps here, but let's just kind of work through them systematically. I want you to head up 3 columns on a planning sheet. Columns is fine. You can do it as rows. You can even just do it as bullet points. I don't really care how you do it, but what you're going to want to head up is A, B, and C. Why? Well, for A, let's assume you're using columns in the A column. I want you to bullet point anything unique to text A in relation to the question. Then in column B, anything unique to text B in the B column in relation to the question, of course. And then C stands for comparison, or compare and contrast, however you want to think about it. And this is where you're going to bullet point anything that you've picked up that both texts are doing. So this is where you're looking at those similarities and differences really, really carefully. So you're basically going to work through these 3 columns, and this is going to be a really quick plan that you do. And I'll show you what this might look like in theory. Okay, so looking at question 3 from 2023, this is what it was. Compare how the writers reflect on people's experiences of change, referring to at least one specific aspect, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I've highlighted what I think is the main crux of the question, the keywords there. Reflect on people's experiences of change. I'm especially interested in that word change, but I'm also interested in the word experiences, because this has kind of got connotations around like memory and things that people go through in their life, and that'll become important as you see in the planning that I've come up with. I say I come up with, I ripped it off the 2023 exemplar, but let's just pretend it's my work. Anyway, so in column A, Dealing with text A, the one about the guy taking a shower. What have I noticed in relation to change? Well, it's basically that change and technology kind of go hand in hand, and that technological change and human progress are kind of intrinsically connected, and that in this instance, change is a positive thing, right? The guy's basically reflecting on how over time he got like better showers and how cool that was and how nice it is to have a warm shower and all of that stuff. Like I said, it's a slightly weird text, but just kind of got to go with it. All right. Now, in column B, I'm looking at text B. Reminder, this is the one about the lady reflecting on how when people get married, they change their names, and the teacher she had who didn't change her name when she was a kid. So what have I picked up here? Well, basically, it's this idea of name change and essentially the gender dynamics around this, how women take men's names and that kind of change, and how some people kind of embrace this, other people resist it, and how change can be a kind of positive thing for some people, but maybe a negative thing for others. So that's my kind of unique take on text B in relation to change. Now in column C, thinking about what both texts are doing, I kind of pick up this idea that they're both using memory, and this is a kind of structural device, a narrative device. They're both drawing on memories to look back on things that have happened in the past. Text A is looking nostalgically, like I said, at kind of showering and the kind of feelings of this when you're a kid and stuff like that. And text B is looking at how the memories of her teacher were really formative in her kind of political opinions about what it is to take somebody else's name when you get married. So that's something that both texts are doing, which I've picked up on. So you can see in each of my columns, column A is dealing with text A, column B is dealing with text B, and C is looking at some kind of overlap that I've picked up in both instances. Now, I do appreciate that my beautiful like PowerPoint here looks really nice and I've got it all color-coded and it's all typed out and all my bullet points are quite concise and clear, and you're probably thinking this is unrealistic for me when I'm planning under time pressure. Have you seen my handwriting? It's appalling. Yeah, I do appreciate that, and let's just kind of consider what this might look like realistically. Like in column A, I might have literally just written something like change and tech, change equals good. And in, column B, I might have just written name change, marriage, change, plus, minus to represent, that it's positive and negative. And then in column C, I might have just written like memory, looking back, nostalgia, a few words that will kind of trigger my discussion. Whatever you do, it's just got to make sense to you. It can be super duper brief, and that's totally fine. The marker doesn't look at your planning sheet and try to decipher your plan. The only person who needs to understand the way that the plan works is you, right? So however you want to tackle it is totally fine, but I do like this approach of just going A, B, C, and at least trying to bullet point a couple of things, because it is going to direct your discussion when you get into things. Okay, so what do I now do with this? I'm going to move into my phase 2, which is writing. Because what I'm essentially arguing in the writing phase is that you're going to write 3 body paragraphs. One on what you've put in the A column, one on what you've got in the B column, and one on what you've got in the C column. But before we do that, we need to flip the question and write a bit of an intro. This is something I'll talk you through in a moment. You might have seen it in my previous videos, but I'm also going to add a very simple overview to my introduction too, and I'll show you what that might look like. As I've already suggested, you're then going to move into these A, B, C paragraphs, and optionally, you can write an expansive conclusion. If you look at the 2023 exemplar, it does not do this. That's totally fine. But if you do have the time up your sleeve, which will be a miracle, but maybe you do, you can push into an optional expansive conclusion if you want to. Okay, so what does this flip question intro look like in this comparative section? Because it is slightly different to what I've run through in the previous videos on just dealing with individual texts. Well, the flip question is where you just take the question or statement, whatever you want to call it, and you just kind of subtract some words and you add in others. You flip it into an active statement. So I take the question, which is compare how the writers reflect on people's experience of change, and I sub out compare how, I turn it into an active statement, and I add a little bit to it. The writers reflect on people's experience of change in a variety of ways. Now that is super generic, and that's totally fine because I'm going to expand on it a little bit with a kind of overview of what my 3 talking points are going to be. Now I've color-coded it for your convenience, I suppose. So you can see I just want to add a simple sentence on each of my talking points. So text A suggests that technological change can be a positive for many. That's a kind of brief summary of what column A is saying. Text B contends that political change can be contentious and create conflict. That is a kind of brief summary of what I've got in my B column. And in both texts, the writers draw on memory to explore change, and that's what I've kind of got in my C column there. Now, I appreciate that that is slightly longer than the introductions I've kind of run through in previous videos, but I do think it's important to add this additional context for the marker, and also just for yourself so you know the direction that you're going to take this discussion in. Okay, right, we're moving on. We're getting there, people. Bear with me. What are you now going to do? Well, you're just going to move into these ABC paragraphs, right? So you're going to systematically work through each column. Paragraph 1, body paragraph 1, is going to deal with text A and the stuff that you've bullet pointed there. And then you're going to go through column B, and then you're going to go through column C. Now, why would you do this? Well, it means that you're going to cover each text evenly because you're going to devote one paragraph to text A, one paragraph to text B, and then kind of discuss both of them sort of 50-50 in your C paragraph. Now, worst case scenario, you run out of time and you don't write that C paragraph. I think this is actually totally fine. I think you're probably going to benefit from getting additional marks if you can write that C column. But if you've dealt with text A in a decent way, and you've dealt with text B in a decent way, and you've touched on these aspects, you're probably going to be racking up a decent amount of marks, and you will have kind of impressed the marker. So it's a good strategy to deal with those 2 texts first on their own. Why the C paragraph can be helpful is it can also serve as a bit of a default conclusion. Because you're discussing both of the texts together in relation to the question, you're probably making some pretty good concluding comments, and it means that if you don't get onto a standalone conclusion, that's probably totally fine. Like I said, the 2023 paper does not use a conclusion. It's really just 3 substantial body paragraphs. Now, I am going to take a personal standpoint here as an English teacher. What I like to see is language features, and I think language features realistically are a must. Certainly if you are chasing higher grades. If you go back historically and you look at the top tier excellence responses in the unfamiliar paper, they weave language features into the discussion really consistently. Okay, they're peppered throughout, they're always reinforcing the point, always in relation to the question. So language features for you are a must if you're chasing those high grades. I'm sorry, people, you really got to touch on some language features, in my humble opinion. Okay, so you've done this. You've basically finished the paper. Hey, you look at the clock. You have a little bit of time. Okay, you can write an expansive conclusion if you want to, but this is kind of optional, as I said. So what does that look like? Well, it's the same as I've kind of discussed in previous videos. The expansive conclusion is just where you kind of expand the discussion out. You're trying to push the discussion beyond the text a little bit here. You're really trying to maybe tie it to things like the human condition or kind of relevant real-world contextual issues and social links and stuff like that. Again, those contextual clues could be really helpful. Like, for example, the texts may have kind of cultural or political or like gender dynamics to them, just like the example that I've run through where text B has got a strong kind of gendered, kind of feminist angle. You could kind of touch on some of this in the conclusion if you want to kind of push outwards and maybe just rack up a few more marks with those beyond the text links. But as I said, a good student will weave this into the body paragraphs anyway, meaning if they run out of time and can't write an expansive conclusion, it's certainly not the end of the world. Okay, so yeah, that's basically my approach. It's as simple as ABC. You just work through text A, text B, you kind of touch on some things that both texts are doing, you systematically write about that in order within your written response, and if you have time, you push out into an expansive conclusion. How are you going to perfect this strategy? Well, yeah, you're going to have to practice this. This is a structural difference to what I've suggested for dealing with individual texts, and it has to be because you're dealing with two texts. This is not the same. It is a different kind of response. It requires integrating ideas from two texts. So you're going to have to practice how you actually go about doing that. It's really essential, people. Now, re-annotating the text can be helpful if you have time. Like I said, having a different colored pen or different colored highlighter can be helpful, because what I'm going to suggest in the kind of third bullet point down is that when you're looking at language features and you're analyzing the text, it's going to be important that you're not kind of doubling up on things that you've really labored in your previous responses for text A and text B. If you're kind of just repeating content, if you're drawing on the same language features, if you're kind of making the same sort of discussion points, that's going to feel repetitive to the marker. It's probably going to limit the kind of grade that you're going to get in this comparative section. You're going to have to push it towards more diverse points. And yeah, certainly that is going to happen by default if you read the frickin' question, people, and you're across the fact that it's asking you to look at these texts through the lens of a different question and different keywords. Last but not least, I think doing this section last, as I've pointed out, is strategically advantageous, but it does mean that time management is essential. Like, it is huge. What you're going to have to really practice is writing manageable paragraphs. It's complicated because you're essentially devoting just one paragraph to an entire text, whereas in the previous responses, you've written 2, 3 paragraphs about that text. So you're going to have to cut straight to the chase, straight to the point, really be concise and succinct with what you're trying to say, and that really only comes with practice. And it comes with time practice, where you actually put yourself under time pressure and try to replicate exam conditions, so you get good at writing fast and you get good at being selective with the points that you are trying to make. And yeah, as I mentioned before, if you can integrate your concluding beyond the text discussion throughout, it might mean that you can eliminate that conclusion in the first instance, and yeah, that's going to save you some writing time too. So, okay, that's my video on the comparative aspect of the unfamiliar text exam at level 3, also at scholarship. I feel like this approach works in both instances. Please let me know what you think. It's something I've kind of come up with that some of my students have said is really good and far simpler than approaches they've taken in the past, but I'd be really keen to hear in the comments about approaches that you have to this paper. Is there something that works for you that's maybe better than this, more simple, more straightforward? I'd love to hear it. As always, if you could like and subscribe to my videos, that'd really help me and encourage me to keep making them. And until next time, ka kite, and yeah, up the waz.